Well, ladies and gentlemen, greetings, good afternoon, and welcome to the afternoon session on day one of Communities in Control 2017. My name is Brett DeHoot. It is a pleasure to be here. I'm going to facilitate the next hour of conversation aimed at, well, I suppose, enlightening you as to how to engage the population, the great unwashed out there, and create positive social change. Special welcome to our people at the cabaret style seating at the front, cheap seats at the back, you're welcome too. It is a joy to be here. I have been involved in every single Communities in Control conference since it began. It's an annual milestone. It is my North Star. I have told Kathy and Dennis many times over, there is nothing that will stop me being here. And indeed, I have been here very, very ill. I have said no to high-paying corporate gigs to be here. I have postponed elective surgery to be here. Which is why I was surprised last year when I received a long and halting voicemail from Dennis explaining that there would be no Communities in Control conference for 2016. This surprised me. But I said, look, let's make the most of it and let's meet for lunch perhaps and we can get together. Still nothing came back from Dennis. Days later, I got a text message saying, no, don't turn up at our office. We're really busy. It's best that you're not here. I was confused. But isn't it just great to be all back here together again for 2017 for the first time in 2 years? Excuse me, Alan, I'm talking. I'm sorry, Alan, I couldn't quite hear you. Whisper in my shell-like ear once more. There actually was a conference last year without me? Pop quiz. Who attended Communities in Control 2016? Get out! Thank you. That extravagant gag was brought to you with the assistance of Alan Mattick, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Alan. Well, we are here. And I was shunned last year, but I'm back. You know why? I'm desperate. And it's showbiz. So we're back. We have an hour to talk about creating change, getting people involved from the grassroots up, because people allegedly have the power. 5 panellists join me on stage. In no particular order, I'd like to introduce them to you. What they won't be doing is the 25 minutes each before taking your questions. After I briefly introduce them, I'm going to throw some questions and issues at them, and you too will ask your questions and share your wisdom. We have 3 microphone runners out there on the floor. Rodney Croom joins us. Rodney, make yourself known to the audience. Rodney has been an advocate for LGBTI equality for almost 30 years, and he has a small cult following located at table 4. He led the successful campaign to decriminalise homosexuality in Tasmania, which was utterly remarkable because that was a different era in terms of our social milieu. Indeed, it was almost a different age. And he was the founder and national director of Australian marriage equality until last year, so it proves that it was just a phase you were going through. He was made, thank you, think about it. He was made a member of the Order of Australia in 2003 and was Tasmanian Australian of the Year in 2015. Please make Rodney very welcome. One thing I know about marriage equality is we need a plebiscite to have it. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're in favour of marriage equality, raise your hands and say aye. Aye. Motion carried. We can all get on with business. I did that on behalf of 2 gay male friends. One's a caterer and one's a civil celebrant. So anyway, Dr. Sonia Hood joins us. Sonia, make yourself known. Dr. Sonia Hood, CEO of Community Hubs Australia. Who knows Community Hubs Australia? They are an interesting beast because they are everywhere across the nation. They might not have the public profile that one would expect, which is interesting. I'm going to investigate that. In my words, not Sonia's, Community Hubs Australia creates hubs, gatherings of women who are socially, culturally, economically isolated. Those hubs take place in schools across Australia, where good things happen, job skills, life skills, social connections. Sonia's worked in the US, UK and Australia, always one step ahead of the law. I am currently developing a website for Community Hubs Australia. And I don't usually swear in presentations, but I'll have to make an exception here, Sonia. At the first meeting, I said, Sonia, this is terrific. You're taking the opportunity to really up your digital communications game. Big opportunity. And she said, I know, Brett. This is very important. Don't F it up. And so, with those words ringing in my ears, we've set forth on an exciting collaboration. I'm not making that up. Luke Hilakari joins us. Luke, make yourself known to these people, comrade. Secretary of Victorian Trades Hall Council, working with some of the workers in our economy at the lower end of the socio-economic scale under the banner of We Are Union. And you've had some pretty high-profile media success with some hashtag-based campaigns and physical actions and appearances in Parliament that upset Malcolm Turnbull's day. We'll talk about that later on. And afterwards, Luke, I believe you'll be leading a wildcat action and taking half the conference goers out of the room. Thank you very much. All right. Katerina Gator joins us. Katerina, make yourself known. Katerina is the founder and CEO of Climate for Change, sometimes known as C4, that's the numeral C. Is that right? That is so modern. Honestly, I can barely get my head around it. It's a non-profit, some staff, volunteer-driven, and their flagship campaign is Conversations for Change, which are conversations a couple of hours long that take place in people's homes, a bit like Tupperware sales, but without the plastic, as you say, Katerina. And the idea is to have a, quote, transformative conversation, sort of face-to-face, human-to-human, house by house. We will see how well this model works, Katerina. Lovely to have you here. And by the way, the standards that Katerina places on those 2-hour meetings in people's homes are pretty high. If all attendees at the parties don't flush their car keys down the toilet and walk home, it's declared a failure. I like that. Matthew Phillips joins us. Matt, make yourself known to us. Seasoned. You're described as a seasoned campaigner. You've self-described. You're grizzled. No, you didn't self. Well, who described you as seasoned? It makes you seem old and burnt out. But you are fresh and hungry, are you not? He's the human rights coordinator at GetUp. You know all those emails that are in your inbox unread? They're from him. That is such an easy gag, Matthew. I apologise, but it got a laugh, so I'll be using it again. He's leading the No Business in Abuse campaign, which targets corporate involvement in mandatory detention because it's very lucrative for some corporations out there. You know, corporations we've probably all dealt with today in one means or another. And you're also a bit of a hashtag activist with the hashtag Let Them Stay, which aims to prevent the deportation to Nauru of asylum seekers. I haven't used that hashtag. I'm more of a hashtag I stand with Chappelle or hashtag One Direction I miss you. So, ladies, I think I speak on behalf of all of us here. Ladies and gentlemen, please make our 5 panellists very welcome. All right, 5 brains, real campaigners. They have made change happen. They're very happy to take your questions. Don't be shy and don't make the classic mistake of leaving it for the last minute. It will come and it will go. Let me throw to the panel, anyone and everyone in for your chop. It is easy to categorise this era as one of great self-interest and narcissism and selfies and consumerism. Is there actually an appetite among real people, not the people in this room, bunch of lefties, real people outside this room to get involved and create some social change? Folks, over to you. Okay, next question. I have some thoughts on my question. Sonia, try not to swear.
I'm going to try my hardest, but I can't promise. My opinion is absolutely there's huge appetite for change and huge appetite for change on the ground. And actually, so we have 70 sites or we will have 70 sites by the end of the year in 3 different states. We work with migrant and refugee women and preschool children. Our latest hubs are opening in Ipswich, which is Pauline Hanson Heartland, and we've been greeted there like the second coming. People are genuinely pleased to be welcoming refugee and migrant women, to help them learn English, to help them understand our school system, to help get their kids school ready, and to help them on volunteering or job pathways or whatever they want. I am constantly amazed by the generosity of people with their time and with their goodwill.
Because to make those hubs happen, you need support of schools and policymakers, and so you've got to persuade people that there's a need for it.
Absolutely, and so we sit in primary schools, state and Catholic primary schools in 3 different states. We're funded by philanthropy, by the federal government, by state governments. Nobody in their right mind would have started up a system like this that had that much bureaucracy, but it works because at the ground there are people who understand the needs of their community. They can connect services with people in their communities, and if you move all of the bureaucracy and nonsense out of the way, people can generally get things done. And when you ask in a community, can people come along and help with volunteering on whatever form that is, generally speaking, people come. The default reaction to people, to new arrivals in this community, is generally to welcome them, not to hate them. That doesn't play well in media, but it plays very well in community.
Katerina.
So I mean, I would agree from our experience that there is definitely an appetite to get involved in many levels of campaigns. But I think I wanted to draw on some research. I'm not sure, can I have a show of hands who's familiar with the Common Cause work? Not that many. Okay, so I will explain it then. I think it was at least 30 years ago, there was some research done on people's values across about 60 different countries and cultures. And overwhelmingly, it found that over 70% of people are motivated by intrinsic or unselfish values. And interestingly enough, that research has been repeated again I think it was last year or the year before, and I think it was 74% of people are still motivated by those values across all, almost many countries and many cultures. And overwhelmingly, it really shows that the majority of people do care, and they care about making the world a better place. We are generally motivated by the same things. But interestingly, that research also showed that 78% of people believed that most people were selfish. And this creates actually a huge problem because there's a phenomenon called pluralistic ignorance, which is a terribly ugly name, to describe the idea that people all think one thing, but they think everybody else thinks the other thing, and so they don't act on or stand up for the thing that they believe in. And so you might see that if you go to a party and you hear a racist or a sexist joke, and you sort of, instead of standing up for it, you sort of think, oh, everybody else is laughing or nobody else is objecting, so it must be me who's misunderstood the joke. And so we don't stand up for it, but everybody else is having the same thought process. And the research shows that when people think that other people aren't motivated, or when they think that other people are selfish, they don't get involved as much. So it creates this cycle where we don't do the things we want to do and we don't believe in. So I think one of the huge antidotes to that is just to actually let people, is to be one of those first people who stands up and does something, but also to let people know that they're wrong in those assumptions. So the research also shows that as soon as people are shown that that's not true, that's how you break that cycle. So the other part of that research also talks about our value. We might be predisposed to key values, unselfish values, but we can be primed at any one moment to act with selfish values. So it's not like we all have, some people have these values and some people have those values. We all actually have the whole gamut. I can be motivated by power and status and wealth, although I'm not generally predisposed to do that. But if I go to a shopping mall with lots of sale messages, I can be motivated that way. And equally, perhaps Donald Trump could be motivated more selflessly if he went for a long walk in nature. So different things, that might be a bit hopeful, but different contexts can prime different values. And I guess in our society at the moment, we do have a lot of marketing messages that mean that even though we might be generally predisposed to be selfless in our behaviour, we are constantly being primed the other way. So it's also really important in our work to try and counter that and not be sucked into the idea that we have to talk to those selfish values.
Katerina, I don't think Donald Trump has experienced nature or walking. Even walking is beyond him. And I must say, I know that research exists about our common values and being very positive, although there's a lot of evidence that in behaviour people act differently to how they respond to service. And Donald Trump's election, the majority of women voted for Donald Trump. Madam.
Thank you. I think that was a really interesting point about both of you. In terms of the core values being positive and morally sound. Just sort of taking that in another direction, in terms of stigmatized issues like mental health, where people consider themselves to be doing the right thing and they may be also surrounded by other communities that think that they're doing the right thing. What do you think is a good way to sort of influence change in that sector, where it's not a case of majority of the people concerned or sort of like morally right, but just because of the history of it being so stigmatized?
Is that a question for me?
Or Katerina? Please. And panel, if you feel you've got some wisdom there.
Was that? Yep. I mean, I have to say my expertise is not in mental health. But I guess, you know, the research shows, again, I guess, but leading by example. So that's certainly something that I would consider, but I'm not sure if the rest of the panel has anything. No?
Perhaps we can get back to that. Matt, I want to ask you a question. GetUp has run many campaigns on many issues, and you've got the data to see what people are actually interested in, to what they actually respond to. You know, we don't necessarily triage issues and deal with the most important and urgent first, and so on and so forth. You know, anyone working with animals knows that you might get a bonus degree of involvement from the community because you're dealing with animals. What sort of issues create people, inspire people to get involved?
I think there's a couple of aspects to that. I think in some ways it's around the way that we frame and message a particular campaign. So I think I read a quote by Anat Shankar-Zoroil, who's a cognitive linguist who works on messaging and framing recently, and I'm paraphrasing, but her main point was that the current crisis in human rights that we're seeing globally is in part responsible because of the way that human rights advocates have failed to convincingly provide a values-based argument for why human rights are important and something to value. And I do think that sometimes we get hung up on talking through technicalities, preoccupied with engaging in a kind of just discourse that we understand amongst each other, but we fail to communicate it more urgently and compellingly publicly. So I think in part that question can be answered by the way that we communicate our campaigns, communicate our values in a way that kind of enlists people in support. I think another thing that can be considered though is issues seem to arrange themselves through the way that politics operates, at least in Australia, in a way that means that some of them will be hot for a period and others not. So I think it's always something to bear in mind when our opponents are pushing a particular line, to consider how to engage with that in a way that doesn't politicise a point that's beyond achieving a good outcome on, I guess. So I'm thinking when something becomes highly politicised, sometimes both sides can continue to run a narrative on it that it becomes in the end unhelpful. So I think it's something to consider when looking at the politics of the way that these issues are playing out, that sometimes we need to be more, I guess, disruptive in the way that we shape the terms of the debate rather than kind of falling in behind and operating within the sphere that's kind of been allocated to us.
By disruptive, what do you mean? More bold, more forthright, more confrontational?
Yeah, I think being more bold is one way to go about it, and not just to, like, I guess I can speak in the refugee and asylum seeker space most from experience. I feel like that's a debate in Australia where we've, in the last 15 years, seen the policies and debate around people seeking asylum, people seeking safety, become more and more toxic over a period of time. So I think one thing that we did when we were looking at that very issue was to say, well, the policies are based on four things. So it's majority public support, so a lack of public opposition in serious numbers to those policies, a bipartisan support for abusive policy, corporate engagement and complicity in that system, and then the fourth kind of leg of the chair, if you like. The fourth leg of the chair was the permissions by the PNG and Nauruan governments to keep the camps open. So I think rather than trying to change the discourse for how we talk in the public space about people seeking asylum, in the first instance we just targeted the most vulnerable leg of that chair. And I think with No Business and Abuse, what that did was it made associating through your business activities with the activities that are carrying on in those camps toxic. And to this day, there's no company willing to take on the contract in Manus or Nauru due to the reputational, financial and legal risk. So I guess what that did was it was disruptive in a way that it changed the nature of the debate, because the government now is faced with the problem. They've got no one to run those camps. So something has to shift. And then I guess that's opened up opportunities to have a discussion based more on shifting people's hearts and minds.
Please, Rodney.
I'd like to pick up on that in terms of the marriage equality debate, which is a good example of what you're talking about, Matthew. Those forces in Australia that want to stop marriage equality from happening try very hard to muddy the waters, to distract attention away from the key issues of equality, of people's aspirations to have the same opportunities in life as everyone else, and to make it about conflict, to make it about Margaret Court, and whether she deserves to have an arena named after her or not, which isn't the issue. But too often, groups that oppose the reform, knowing that they have lost the debate on whether, two guys should be able to get hitched or not, will take the public debate down these paths of, what about the children, or religious freedom, or respecting ageing tennis stars. And that's why it's so important to use your word disrupt that by doing our best to bring it back to the personal, back to what will engage people's hearts and minds, as you said, Matthew. Because we know that when there is this politicisation of the issue, when there's these heated distractions, people turn off. LGBTI people become frustrated, their families become disillusioned about whether we can actually achieve this reform, and Middle Australia goes, it's too hard. We always, in our work, have to bring it back to who is affected, why it matters to them, and to remind people that it's an urgent reform, particularly for those elderly same-sex partners who want to marry before they die. Those personal stories I've found in my experience over 30 years are crucial. I know it's a bit of a cliche when people say, oh, personal stories make the difference. But in this case, where, in the case of marriage equality, where to begin with people didn't quite understand what the reform was, or now when there's people who, a minority of people who are so stridently trying to stop the reform, personal stories have a really, really important role to play. And we have to, as activists, as advocates, make space for those people in all of the heated debates, for them to come through and talk quietly about why this matters to them. And I was in Geelong 2 weeks ago, and there's been a bit of a debate down in Geelong, or Surf Coast, about raising rainbow flags, whether the council should do that or not. Another heated debate that's a bit of a distraction. Mm-hmm. But at the forum that I spoke at, there were people in Geelong, from Geelong, who had really important stories to tell about why this reform mattered to them, how they'd been to visit their local MP, Sarah Henderson, a Liberal, how they changed her mind, and how they hoped, again, to push her further towards supporting a free vote in the Liberal Party. And I could see that story changing the narrative and giving people the hope that they needed, giving them a path forward, which on a reform like marriage equality, which the majority of people support, but which still isn't happening, is so very important for maintaining engagement, to give people a sense that there's a way forward.
Rodney, I'll pause you there. I know Luke wants in on this point.
So I might just follow in with Rod and Matt's point. Starting with Matt's point, he spoke about Anot, and people need to look her up and check out her work. But one of her key takeaways is that facts and science convince people of nothing. if that was the case, we would not have a debate about climate change. It would just be done. We would not have a debate about Gonski and education funding. It would just be done. What changes people's minds is where Rod was strongly heading towards is about storytelling. And storytelling needs great narrative arcs. You need good guys and you need bad guys and you need victims and you need a vision, a hope for people to head in that direction. For us at Trades Hall, we do a lot of campaigning. And we want to campaign from a place of authenticity. And so when we think about it, if we want to have a conversation in a community about healthcare, it won't be me going out there talking about healthcare, it will be a nurse. And if you have a think about a debate about healthcare, if you had to trust a nurse versus a politician about what's going on in your local hospital, I know who everyone trusts. It's a nurse. So a nurse from the local Frankston hospital hitting on homes at Frankston, having conversations at the door, is really, really important. And it changes people's minds and it changes people's votes. The personal story, whether it's your own story or whether it's a story of your occupation, firefighters talking about emergency services, doctors doing the same thing, teachers talking about education, and you all have that opportunity too. So you come from these amazing community organisations and you'll be absolutely trusted on the areas in which you give advice and do your work. That's the place where you need to come from. Don't come from that place of facts and science because you won't convince a soul. Tell the personal story about who you're working with.
You've been very patient, folks, and if you do have a question, raise your hand. We'll get the microphone to you. Hello.
We as the age of 16 to 25 are the first generation to feel the impacts of climate change and the last generation that can do something about it. My name's Ashley and I go to school 90 minutes north of Melbourne, a school called Seymour College. Myself, I have a small committee of committed teachers and students who are committed to changing our school to 100% renewable energy in the next 5 years. And I had some questions. I have 3 actually for you, Katerina. And they are, 1, how do you convince non-believers that climate change exists and that we are affecting our environment? 2, do you have advice on how to motivate the school on this issue? And 3, do you speak at schools?
Thank you.
You certainly made the most of that microphone
Thank you
time.
so much.
Kid's got talent, and she's a threat to me.
So to answer the last question first, because that's perhaps the easiest, I can speak at schools. I'm happy to talk to you afterwards, and if I can't, then I do know of others who do, both within our organisation and in other organisations. So happy to chat to you afterwards. I think the first question's really interesting. It's one actually we get a lot. So our work really is trying to help people who do understand climate change and the changes that are needed and are committed to those changes to have better conversations with the friends and family in their networks about that and get them on board so that we have the social climate that we need for the changes we need from the people who can deliver it, mainly in government. And so as soon as people hear that, they think, well, how can I convince those deniers? But the reality is that polling shows that, true deniers only make up about 7% of the population. So unfortunately, a lot of them are in powerful positions. But change actually doesn't, I don't know if you're familiar, there's a theory called social diffusion theory, which describes how change passes through society. And it starts with a small group of people who are called innovators. They come up with an idea, they're sort of like guinea pigs, they try it out. If that succeeds and the next group of people see it, they take it on. They're called the early adopters. They're like trendsetters, and they're the ones who really get something going. And when enough of them have taken it on board and talked to people that they know about it, the next group of people, which is called your early majority, take it on. And they're the critical mass that you need for any change. So what that really tells us about changing anything, whether it's society or your school, is that the people we need to engage are not the deniers. The people we really need to engage are the people who are the majority of the population who would say, yes, climate change is real, it's serious, we should be doing more. Australia should play a leading role, even at some cost. They love renewable energy. Most people in Australia would answer yes to all of those questions on a questionnaire, but they wouldn't if you asked them if you gave them another survey that said, what do you care about, what do you worry about, what do you think about, what do you talk about, what do you vote on? Climate change isn't up there. And so that, in terms of climate change, they're really the people that we need to engage and convince them of the need for the action that we're proposing. So I guess my answer generally is I don't try very often to convince deniers. I did once have a really interesting conversation by accident with a denier. To cut a very long story short, the best tool we have in that is actually to try and listen and understand those people and ask them questions. And it's amazing if you practice that, where the conversation can go and how what can often seem like a loggerhead can disperse. But that's another topic that we might cover. But yeah, my answer to you would actually be to not worry too much about trying to convince those people. We often want to convince the people who have different ideas from us, but actually the people we need to get on board are the people who are almost already there, and just convince them how serious, how urgent this issue is, what needs to be done about it at a large scale, and how they can play a part in that. So what we find is actually the biggest thing turning people off action on climate change is just that they can't see how they can play a role. And if you can paint that picture for them and give them a vision and show where they fit into that, they'll often want to get on board. And I guess those are the tools I would use in your school as well, but also happy to chat with you afterwards.
There's a hand up a couple of hands in the very front row. And as the microphones are making their way to you, I'll throw a question to the panel. You know, we say that politicians and policymakers are poll-driven. In fact, we sort of downgrade them for being so poll-driven, yet there are some issues out there, big fat ones. I'm thinking of physician-assisted dying or voluntary euthanasia, marriage equality, maybe even overpopulation, where there is significant, long-term, quite overwhelming public view in one direction, and yet they still do not move in that direction. What gives? Rodney, I'm particularly interested in your view on this.
Well, on marriage equality, they are slowly giving. We've seen a slow build-up in numbers of supporters in our federal parliament over the last few years that lags behind but corresponds to increases in popular opinion. And to the point now where there's a majority in both houses. So if the Liberal Party allowed its members to vote in favour, it'd pass tomorrow. And that is the block. That is why it doesn't happen. So we can see that there has been progress, and the progress has been largely because of the personal storytelling that we've emphasised so much today already. The remaining blocks, I guess, when I look at those countries that have achieved marriage equality already through legislative action and not just through a Bill of Rights, the crucial element that they had that we lack is leadership at the top. Now, of course, Malcolm Turnbull supports marriage equality, but he obviously doesn't think it's important enough for him to take a risk on. Julia Gillard was the same. It's not a partisan thing. We've lacked that strong, courageous leadership at the top. And that has meant that we've just had to work stronger from below. When historians look back on the marriage equality campaign, they'll see it was almost entirely a bottom-up campaign. And even if we are to achieve marriage equality in this term of government, it will be because there are backbenchers in all of the parties with the goodwill and the courage to work together to get legislation through. It's not impossible. I think it can happen. But it'll be because of those backbenchers who work together and achieve the reform. And I've been in situations before where that's happened. You mentioned Tasmania, which was the last state to decriminalise homosexuality. That was actually achieved under a Liberal government in the state least likely to succeed on gay rights because people worked across the parties together to achieve reform. I've seen it happen again, and I'm hopeful. I've seen it happen before. I'm hopeful it'll happen again.
Rodney, I'll move it on because and all panelists, I want to get as many questions addressed as possible, so we'll have to compact our responses. Quick responses from the two of you, please.
Yeah, just quickly on polls. Polls are not enough to convince a politician to do anything, and especially just a single poll. Politicians are primarily interested, I suppose, in remaining a politician. So no one's surprised by that, and then remaining in government. but not for everyone. You would have seen Albo the last fortnight. Think about something else. So, when you think about an individual poll, it's not enough. They're worried about, will that issue move enough votes to flip their seat? Then you've got something of a poll you could worry about. But they're also interested in internal solidarity, advancement, like internal party ramifications, if not. So it's multi-layered. Majority of Australians support the death penalty. Well, that's not going to change because there's not enough heat behind it to actually flip a seat.
If you wish.
I guess I was going to say something similar, that basically just because something is supported by the majority, it's not enough unless that majority is actually prepared to vote on that in the end. And I think there are different reasons for that for different issues and different solutions for that, and a lot of it is about strategy as well, as we've heard. On climate change, I think it's a bit more complex than that. So climate change is one of those issues. The vast majority of people say that they want stronger action, and yet we're not seeing it from our politicians. And in fact, what really, I guess, got me into the work that I do is watching the carbon tax debate unfold. And at that point, when the carbon tax was first proposed, 60% of people actually supported it, believe it or not. And throughout that debate, the majority of people still believed that climate change was real, serious, urgent, that we should do something about it. And yet, that clearly became a very toxic issue, and people actually, seemed to actually vote against it, even though they believed that we should be doing something about climate change. And I remember hearing often at that time, I believe we should be doing something about climate change, just not that. And, every time. And the reality is that to fix climate change, we are going to have to make changes that are not going to be comfortable for people. They are going to cost money. They are going to be disruptive. We cannot fix this problem.
And Katerina, that interests me because I was working social marketing. Everyone talks about the power of stories. And I have a limited faith in stories. I must be frank, and I know that's counter to your views and experience. But stories are all great until the suggested remedy hurts me. In terms of school choice, more people on the bloody road slowing me down, paying more for electricity, although I've just spent, $88 on a quick dinner at blah, blah. Stories are great, but gee, there are a lot of other factors in the mix, aren't there? Like status and comfort and cost and convenience. And sir, you have a question from the floor.
I do. Dean Beck from Joy 94.9. I'd like to know from you how you deal with dissent within the ranks, or how you deal with your people becoming apathetic. Rodney, marriage equality has gone from one umbrella organisation to 3 or 4. Luke, you've had to deal with all sorts of dramas in the trades union area.
What are you talking about?
One big happy family.
Katrina, I don't know whether you've planted trees in the wrong spot or something, but how do you deal with dissent within your ranks and keep your own people on board?
Oh, good. I'll start then.
You crushed them.
So, we from time to time, this is a broad church, right? Unions are democratic organisations. Their leadership is voted on by the rank and file. But from time to time, this is like the bad apple question. Well, we've got a few of them. And what we do is, it wasn't the media or Royal Commission that executed them. That was us. We got rid of our own, and we're the ones who exposed it. And we have to keep this high standard because, it's our members who pay this money. Like, each and every week, the cleaners at Moonee Valley, I used to organise here at Moonee Valley, both the cleaners, the security guards and the hospitality people, they're paying $12 a week. They're on some of the lowest wages, and they're doing that to improve their working lives. So if anyone falsely takes $1 or doesn't do a bargain that improves their working life, we need to crush them. And that's what we go about and do. Now, that might seem, but see, on the other end of the scale, people talk about the CFMEU, and we've got a great rank and file CFMEU member, Lisa, over there. I can see her. If you're working on a construction site, and when the ABC exists, that every 10 days a worker will be killed on a construction site, which union do you want looking after your son or daughter? I'll tell you what, the CFMEU. And that's why their membership numbers on construction sites are through the roof.
Look, I've got to ask. I'm going to ask you a very tough question.
Oh, how tough?
They're the union that has total control over building sites, and yet that is still happening, and they have had total control for a very long time. Isn't that an argument to say, hey, CFMEU, you need to be doing something very, very differently?
Well, when we talk about disruption, you'll see disruption from time to time on building sites, and that's appropriate because the laws aren't right. We don't control the laws, and that's a huge problem. When I can be fined, thousands of dollars for not producing a piece of paperwork to give 24 hours to walk onto a site when I know something is about to collapse, like what am I going to do? Am I going to file that piece of paperwork? Or if your kids were working on that site, would you want me to get on that site quick, smart, and get it fixed? So we make those tough decisions. We get penalised by the law. We then have to pay the fines, and yet the companies that do this stuff, get away pretty much scot-free. So there was a conversation we've seen in the media recently about breaking the law. Well, sometimes the law is wrong. If it was a football match, we change the rules to make sure that, the game gets played fairly. Well, we need to have that bigger conversation in Australia too.
Pop quiz. We're in a pretty progressive, lefty, community-orientated room. Who here is a member of a union? Hands up. Hands up if you could be a member of a union but are not a member of that union. Just a snap poll. Hands up high, don't worry. They can't.
I've got all your faces.
Yeah, that's right.
I've recorded it. You can't be part of the Wildcat strike. You won't be covered.
You won't be walking with a banner down the high street. There was a question, I think, from somewhere here. I've lost it. Sorry. Do we have a question? Oh, you've moved on? Fine. You'll do it one-to-one later. Okay, perhaps we shouldn't be using everybody's time to negotiate that right now. Okay, so I'll move on. Oh, there's a question from the floor there. And Sonia, I want to talk about the issue of does size matter in a moment. Madam.
Hello, my name is Michelle and this is for Rod. I'm a marriage celebrant, and at recent ongoing professional development I was met with 50% of the room that were opposed to performing same-sex marriage, which shocked me. How will we address this once it does pass?
That surprises me too. That was professional development with celebrants.
A broad cross-selection of celebrants? Or were they all from South Australia?
It was in a small country town in northern New South Wales. It was in Grafton, so I don't know whether that has any bearing on it, possibly. But it really did surprise me in that when we do our training to become celebrants, we discuss discrimination and that we cannot be seen to be discriminatory. And so when these people were speaking in this way, it concerned me greatly. And then the other part of me thought, well, if I was in a same-sex relationship, I wouldn't want that particular person marrying me anyway. So, but that's the conversation. They have to ring that celebrant and talk to them to find that out, and that could be being crushed all over again. It just concerns me, so, yeah.
There has been quite a discussion about that issue recently, particularly when the government put forward legislation for marriage equality last year, and it gave celebrants an exemption from anti-discrimination laws if they don't want to perform same-sex marriages, but only same-sex marriages, and we objected to that because it was clearly discriminatory. I think a compromise that is being discussed now is the possibility of allowing celebrants who have religious values that mean they don't want to be marrying same-sex couples, that they nominate themselves for a new category, religious celebrants, and in that category they can perform religious ceremonies, but anyone who remains as a civil celebrant will be governed by anti-discrimination law.
That does allow right-wing conservatives to say the gay lobby wants to force celebrants to marry gay people, which again, doesn't that become just another distraction?
Yes, it is potentially a distraction. They often make that claim, but the response, I guess, is that we will not be... when I say we, I'm basing this on surveys that have been done in the LGBTI community. Yep. Overwhelmingly, LGBTI people say we don't want trade-offs in return for marriage equality. We don't want holes punched in anti-discrimination law for civil celebrants or bakers or florists or whomever who currently are governed by those laws so that they can turn us away. Now, of course, no one wants to be married by someone who doesn't want to marry them. But as soon as we start punching holes in anti-discrimination law to allow marriage equality to get through, where does it end? Particularly if those holes are punched in the name of religious conscience. And we've seen in the United States where these kinds of religious freedom laws have already begun to be applied beyond the LGBTI community to interracial couples and others. I think we should be proud of our anti-discrimination regime in Australia and try and keep that solid. If it's okay, can I just quickly respond to that point about divisions that was raised before? There are different groups now campaigning for marriage equality, and that was because last year, of course, the government put forward a plebiscite and different people had different views on whether we should go down that path. I have been involved in this stuff for 30 years and I've seen what deep, deep damage is caused by, within minority communities, by fratricide. Or sororicide, not to be sexist about it. And I certainly would not want to see that happen again. And I'm glad that in the marriage equality movement, even though people are taking different paths, that we tend to be working together and respect each other's work. And I think actually that's a good example of how people in communities can pursue different strategies, take different actions, but work relatively well together. And I don't know anyone in our community who would want to, particularly at this critical time, begin some kind of civil war. That's not what it's about. It's about ensuring that we get to marriage equality having explored every possible option, every possible strategy.
From the floor, directly in front of me, sir.
Yeah, Rodney spoke about it, I think just touched on it briefly, but I was wondering how much of an impact the media makes on these progressive issues, so much so that they're giving kind of equal voice or equal airtime to, say, the 6% of climate change deniers or the minority of people who disagree with same-sex marriage. Are they actually hindering that in their efforts to, I guess, give equal voice to all different sides of the issue?
From my point of view as an advocate, there's two things to consider there. Firstly, yes, the other side will always have their voice heard, so that's inevitable. So who should be the person speaking on our side, if you like? And wherever I can, I try and make sure that it's people who have a close, intimate, personal connection to the issue, who can talk about why it matters to them. So it's not just some, advocate from who belongs to an organisation, but someone with a personal story. And it's also really important that we consider the role of local media in this debate. Some of the most important people in the marriage equality debate in Australia are people whose names you wouldn't know and you will never know because they're working at a local level. I'll mention Geelong again because that's where I was most recently. There's a woman down there, Sharon Faulkner, who has been instrumental in getting local politicians across the line, getting local businesses up in support of marriage equality, getting the Geelong Advertiser to adopt an editorial policy in favour of marriage equality. And her work has moved that community to a new place. That's what really matters in this debate. A slanging match on the project between Margaret Court and Waleed Ali isn't necessarily going to change anything. But people like Sharon are changing things in local media, and I do my best to try and focus on that local media because of its importance.
Luke.
I think you're right about the proportion argument, and that weighting should be given. It isn't, but it should be. But the media matters less and less. Like the number one news source for people on under the age of 30 is they get that through social media. It's either through Facebook and Twitter. Get up here, we'll have a mailing list. I don't know, what's it, 1 point what now?
1.1.
Yeah, 1.1 million. We've got 1.6 million members. Change.org, I think, we hate them, but anyway, don't ever use them. We'll talk about that later if you like, one-on-one. But it's got, another 1.3 million. Like, we can talk directly to our members, unfiltered conversation, and get them to take action. Why would I want to always go through the media and have someone interpret the words I want to say and then put a spin on it and then get a counter point of view? Like, you've all got membership lists. How you use them, how you value that, how you avoid spamming them, that is just super important to engaging your volunteers to make change.
Karen.
I want to add to that. It's true, the media is a key part in that and it's frustrating, but also the social diffusion theory that I talked about earlier also talks about how change passes through that curve, and it tells us that although people hear information in mass media and now social media and in campaigns, a lot of that information sits somewhere in our heads, and it's not until we have a conversation with someone that we know and we trust that we process that information and we decide, are we going to take it seriously, believe it, how are we going to respond to it, what are we going to do about it? And so that's why it is so important for all of us who care about all of our issues to learn how to have those better conversations with the people who trust us about the issues we care about and get them on board.
Hands up, who's changed an opinion on something of significance in the last 12 months?
Who's what?
They're hard to change, and I think even most of the people with their hands up are lying. So, I do think sometimes campaigners do believe that people's opinions can be changed through various means and methodologies and based on science or based on messaging, but gee whiz, I know selfishly, maybe I'm the only one in the room, I kind of got my set of opinions. It's a suite, it's an ensemble, it's one of a piece. And occasionally I may change something. And I don't know if it's that conversation with a friend or if it's that media report or if it's a social media tweet. Madam.
I want to ask Matthew how we genuinely change the narrative around refugees and asylum seekers. The focus is rightly on Nauru and Manus Island, but there's thousands of people on bridging visas living in our communities who are really in dire straits. And, people working in the community, in humanitarian settlement services, in other support services, have to deal with the desperation of people on a daily basis. So how do we change that? We march the streets, and that does nothing really. How do we genuinely shift the community in terms of having a more humane approach to people in our society?
Thank you for that question. I think it's really timely. Just last week, Peter Dutton, he's gone on a rampage, I think, and he's really targeting those 7,500 people who are currently living in our community, seeking safety in Australia, but who have been prevented from applying for asylum or protection in Australia for up to 5 years. So many of them weren't allowed to even apply for a visa until late last year. And now Peter Dutton has announced an arbitrary deadline of the 1st of October, whereby those people need to fill out very complex forms that require legal assistance with an overloaded burden on legal centres that are providing this advice pro bono. And if they don't fulfil those requirements by the 1st of October, the government is threatening to deport them back to harm. And to cut off their access to any kind of support services in the community. So I think it's a timely question. We've launched a campaign called Fair Process, which looks to shift, in the first instance, that date to get the government to lift that date. It's arbitrary and it's cruel. And then to put in place a fair process for people seeking safety in Australia. I think for us, it goes back to this thing around telling stories. And the government's been very clever in the way that, in terms of offshore detention, has sought to prevent us even seeing the people that its policies impact. But in terms of the people in Australia, I think they've been here for 5 years. Their children go to our schools, they work in our businesses, they study in our universities. They have lives here and they are part of our community. And I think there is something to be said about working with those people in whatever way they can to talk about what Australia means to them, to talk about what their attachment to our community is. Because I really do believe that the majority of Australians wouldn't tolerate that treatment of people if they felt a basic human connection with them. And I think the government's put in place all sorts of crafty ways to avoid us establishing that human connection. But I think that's the challenge ahead of us in the next few months, is to tell the story of those people in a way that Australians from all parts of our community can relate to them. Because I really don't think that they would stand by and let the government put in place such an unfair process if that was the case.
Sonia.
I think it's a really important question, and I think that the government does a tremendously good job of narrowing the entire migration debate down to one extremely important but actually relatively narrow issue, and with the result that a whole gamut of people is demonised, and we don't really have much comeback on that. The vast majority of migrants living in our community now are here on a temporary basis. They've got very few rights, and they're significantly exploited in our community, either here as temporary workers or as international students. And slowly we're starting to demonise some of them through our media and through our conversations as well. And they are terribly important to our economy for all kinds of reasons. Most of our kids wouldn't be able to go to university without the fees that international students are bringing in. It's Victoria's biggest or second biggest export now. Biggest. Really important. But the issue on the other side of the coin we're not interested in having. I would say go back to some of those grassroots stories and those grassroots ways of interacting with people, whether it's through a community hub or through your local welcome dinner or through something that's going on in your community, and that changes what the face of migration is. When you sit down and have a conversation with somebody or talk to somebody, that makes the face of migration a real personal interaction, not just a story, and not just something that we did up for a PR agency online. And it'll change the way everybody feels about this. The other thing, since I've got the microphone tiny, is that not everything, this is about government, marriage equality is about government, not everything's regulatory. Sometimes it's up to us to make a change in the way we behave or the way we do things, whether it's climate change or whether it's extending a hand of welcome to somebody. And it's not actually, we can bypass an awful lot of that political process if we stop being so hung up on what they're saying about each other, because that's all they're talking about. They're talking about each other, they're not talking about us half the time. And leave the airspace to the issues that really do need regulatory change. But the rest of us, I think, in the meantime, could be getting on with the change in our communities.
I'm bravely, it always happens, there's a flurry of last-minute breaking questions. Madam, I'm sorry, folks, this question will have to be our last because I have a pretty big question to throw to the panel to close. So quick responses, quick question. Madam.
I was glad that you raised the issue of local media
That's all we've got time
recently.
for. My question is...
I just wanted to float that we have not yet this morning, as far as I can remember, mentioned the other level of government, which I think is the grassroots level of government. And I think it's really important that in all of these conversations we keep remembering that local government is the one that's closest to the people, and that often that's where the power and the energy of community and the choices that community wants to be making as a whole come from. So can you reflect a little maybe on what local government has to contribute to your particular fields?
Local government has been played a critical role in the marriage equality debate, with now 50 or 60 municipalities and cities across Australia passing motions in support. And those debates on those motions have often sparked debates in those local communities that wouldn't have happened otherwise, because they're not capital cities, they're not places where people think those kinds of decisions are usually made. But suddenly, it's an important local issue. It's about inclusion in the local community. So yeah, that's been absolutely crucial. We hear a lot about companies that support marriage equality, etc. But again, I think when historians look back, they'll look at local government as being one of the drivers of the debate.
Panel, what is the next big issue that's going to inspire mass action and great disruption? Is there a group in the community that just hasn't found its campaigning mojo out there?
Treaty. That'll be the next big campaign. Treaty.
Sorry.
So the report came out from the Heart of the Nation. Treaty is going to be a massive campaign. I worry it's going to be a divisional campaign. Marriage equality is still going to be a huge campaign. That's not going away. Secure employment for workers. So the casualisation that you and your kids are facing is unbelievable. Great Barrier Reef. And then last one, I'd say in 10, 15, 20 years' time, Republic.
I guess I'd add to that I think when you look at Australian society, there's well over 25% of the population that don't speak English at home as their first language. And I feel like it's related to this migration debate, is that group of people is largely ignored by our politicians. And I think those communities are based across marginal seats all across the country. So I think there will be a consolidation and an activation of those groups.
I also suspect some of those groups are much more conservative than the progressive left likes to acknowledge on a lot of social issues.
Yeah, perhaps, but I think when they feel like their rights are they're under attack and they're being treated like a political football, I think what we've seen through the latest attempt at attacking 18C and the Racial Discrimination Act was a real kind of consolidation amongst those communities. And I think the recent citizenship changes that have been announced have had widespread rejection by multicultural communities in Australia. So I think the government and political parties in general can't continue to treat communities like political footballs.
Thank you, Matthew. Any thoughts on big issues?
In terms of the LGBTI issues, definitely issues and human rights for transgender people will be is a coming issue. I mean, it's already here in terms of debates about transgender young people in schools. But most of the countries that have moved on to marriage equality have found that that's the issue that breaks out after, that's the issue that really excites people's imaginations. And more broadly, a Human Rights Act or Human Rights Charter. So there's movement in Tasmania and Queensland, and I think soon in WA for state-based acts or charters, and I would expect to see movement nationally as well. So that's a coming issue.
Please, Karen.
I don't know if these will be campaigns, but I think they need to be. And actually, they're really crucial to all of our campaigns and all of our issues, and they're related. So I wanted to read something that someone posted on Facebook just the other day in my feed. I was at a panel discussion tonight on the alt-right with 4 amazing writers. Gender was brought up, great points were made. It was a valuable discussion to have. Race was brought up, great points were made, and that was a valuable discussion. The same was true when sexuality was discussed. So far, we're doing well. Class wasn't mentioned once by the moderator or the panellists. A lone question from the audience brought it up. Only one panellist responded. They shut it down immediately and implied that it was almost racist to bring it up. Apparently, discussions about class aren't possible without bringing up whiteness. I'm not necessarily endorsing all of this, but I think it's a really interesting thing that more and more when I talk to friends and they're interested in a whole range of issues and I hear their stories about what they're campaigning on and what the barriers are, so many issues come up. It seems to all go back to me to neoliberalism. And I think that is also that issue that is bringing up this big class divide. And that class divide is playing out in our partisan politics. And I think we have to get better at understanding that issue, how it has come about. Neoliberalism is not just something that eventuated. It was a very conscious project since the 1930s, I think, when the Mont Pelerin Society was first established. I'm only just getting my head around it, but I think we really have to start. George Monbiot has written a really interesting article about it being an invisible hand. When communism was a force, people knew what communism was, and they could talk about it and discuss it and fight against it if they wanted to, but most people wouldn't even know what neoliberalism means. I don't think I fully understand it, but I think it is at play in all of our issues, and it's something we have to understand, we have to name, and we have to fight against. I'm glad you agree.
Do you really know why you're applauding? Fine. Ladies and gentlemen, with time against us, please thank our panellists. Rodney Croom, Sonia Hood, Luke Lakari, Katrina Gator and Matthew Phillips.